now it's time to talk about federated scopes. When you consider an application like Spotify or anything that you use to log into Facebook, when you click login, it pops up with this dialog box. It's, you are interacting with some app and you're granting some scopes. And it's like basic profile information, photos, contacts, whatever, right? You click allow, then it goes back to Facebook and makes a link saying for this person and this application, these scopes have been granted, right? Now, the problem with that, it's actually kind of a threefold problem. In the internet today, there's a very, very tight coupling between authorized parties and audiences and issuers and audiences. So again, by issuer, we mean something like Facebook, something that verifies identity and tokens. By authorized party, we mean something like Spotify or Imgur. And by audience, we mean something like Facebook or Dropbox that has assets that belong to a user. So, in the case of Facebook, there's like a scope, I think it's called email. There's another one I think is called photos. There's another one that has another name. The problem is when I'm signing into Facebook, Facebook might use the name photos, and that represents a different data schema than if I sign in to, say, another provider, Google, right? Like Google might also have a scope called photos, but there's no way to say like, well, what does this photos object look like when I get it? Which means that if I get a token from Facebook, whatever photos means is tightly tied, where photos are the thing that, they're the assets, they're the stuff, they're tightly tied over here. So because there's no way to know what that means programmatically, like a computer can't tell what that data is going to look like, the issuer and the audience are combined into one entity. And this works great in the SaaS model in terms of isolating the user from their data. Same thing here with the authorized party in the audience. They're tightly coupled because the authorized party programs specifically to only one authority. And so that, again, works great for the current internet business model because it isolates the authorized party from being able to be compatible with other services that the user might want to use. So really, obviously the user loses the most, and then also app developers lose a lot too. In OAuth3, we have federated scopes. So you have profile at OAuth3.org is the name of a scope. If you want to present a dialog box to the user, you can request the scope profile at OAuth3.org, and that defines a specific schema that any audience that provides profile at OAuth3.org is going to provide the same schema of data. So this is a win-win. Now the way that works is that for an OAuth3 compatible application, there's going to be a .wellknown / OAuth3, and before the specs release, this will probably change to OAuth3.org in keeping with true. So I'm just going to write that there now, in keeping with true decentralized federated type of a system, / directives.json. Oops. So this is the starting point for any OAuth3 service or application to be able to say where its endpoints are. Now, ideally, there should be no reason for people to have custom endpoints, but because there's legacy applications that might require it, this one strict, well-defined endpoint will contain links to the others. And one of those is scope. So inside that JSON file, there is a key called scope, and that scope will point to .wellknown / OAuth3.org / scopes, and this has templates, scope.json. So whatever scope you're looking up, you're simply substituting the name of that scope right here in the URL. So if I want to discover this scope, now this is not the name of the scope. The whole thing is the name of the scope. And part of this is because in true decentralized federated fashion, your directives you could just be the author hosting a single static file. You just want the brand identity for whatever it is that you're doing. And you might actually, host your other stuff on a CDN that has constant uptime or whatever. So your URL could potentially point to an external site. And so the name is always the full name of the entity. Now a scope could be just OAuth3.org. Like if you had something like profileschema.com, and the sole purpose of the existence of that site was to define that schema, you could do that. But the name of the scope is the full discoverable name. Now, that means, that this is profile@oauth3.org. Now, when it looks up that scope, it finds keys inside for scope, which is going to be, again, the same name of the scope, and then description, which is going to be what the user sees. So this way, when a token issuer opens up an authorization dialog, it doesn't need to know beforehand what it's granting access to. This gives a complete separation of concerns between the issuer, the authorized party, and the audience. So as an issuer, I can be requested to know that some application wants to have access to this schema on audiences where this subject has a profile and assets, right? And I can rely on this because where am I going to go to look it up? I'm going to look it up at the author. So unless the author's site is hacked, the description that's being given for this particular item is the description that's being shown here to the user. Now in the browser, we don't require CORS. It can be discovered via iframes just like the directives.json. So if you are, in a native client where you can go get access to this file directly without having to worry about things like CORS, you can get it. And if you're looking at like an Android browser with an Nginx web server, just old school, run-of-the-mill, it's going to work just fine. So you've got automated, federated scope discovery that makes it so that you can have arbitrary scopes and an authentication dialog, which means you can have arbitrary scopes and a token, which means that we solve, again, the 2 of 3 problem with their authorized parties, audiences, and issuers.